At my daughter's engagement party, my unfaithful wife publicly declared she no longer wanted to live with me while her lover sat among our guests grinning. So I calmly presented her with divorce documents and evidence of her multiple affairs that left everyone stunned. Hey Reddit, my name is Daniel, and this story takes place 4 months before my daughter Rebecca's wedding day. Like any normal husband on a Friday night, I was doing the mundane task of looking for my phone charger, which had somehow migrated to my wife's nightstand. Victoria was in the shower at the time, and that's when her phone started buzzing like crazy on the dresser. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Ryan something. What I saw in the text preview made my stomach drop completely. Can't wait to hold you again tomorrow night. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not the jealous type, and never have been. 18 years of marriage teaches you to pick your battles carefully, and I've always trusted my wife. But this felt different. This felt like something that would change everything. I could have confronted her right then and there when she got out of the shower. Part of me desperately wanted to demand an explanation, to get into it right away. Instead, I did something that probably saved my sanity in the long run. I started paying attention. Really paying attention to the details I'd been unconsciously ignoring. Over the next week, the signs were everywhere once I knew what to look for. There were late-night work calls that she would take out in the garage, claiming she needed privacy to concentrate. New clothes started appearing in her closet. Stuff that was honestly way too young and trendy for a 42-year-old accountant, if I'm being completely honest about it. She suddenly developed an interest in this yoga class that apparently ran until 10 p.m. on Thursday nights. Since when does any yoga class run that late? It didn't make sense. But the real telling sign was her relationship with her phone. Victoria used to leave that thing everywhere around the house. On the kitchen counter, coffee table, in the car console, wherever she happened to set it down. Suddenly, it was glued to her side like some kind of life support system. She would take it with her to the bathroom, keep it face down during our dinner conversations, and even sleep with it tucked under her pillow. That's absolutely not normal behavior for someone who used to regularly ask me to check her text messages while she was driving. 2 weeks into what I now think of as my amateur detective phase, I made a decision that felt both dramatic and necessary at the time. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, like something out of a movie or a soap opera. But here's the thing about being betrayed by someone you've trusted for nearly 2 decades. You need concrete proof, not just gut feelings and suspicious behavior. This was especially important because I was trying to keep our family together long enough to get Rebecca down the aisle. I didn't want to blow up everything based on assumptions, no matter how strong my suspicions were becoming. The private investigator's name was Thomas Wright, and he looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone in his line of work. He had one of those completely forgettable faces and wore generic, unremarkable clothes. The kind of man who could blend into any crowd without drawing a second glance. Despite his ordinary appearance, he was thoroughly professional in every interaction we had. "Mr. Thompson," he said, during our first meeting at a Starbucks that was deliberately chosen to be 25 minutes away from my house. In my experience, when spouses hire me, they already know what they're going to find. The question isn't whether your suspicions are correct. It's whether you're prepared for the full scope of what we might uncover. I thought I was prepared. I really believed I could handle whatever Thomas might discover. Looking back now, I was incredibly naive about just how deep Victoria's deception ran. Thomas Wright delivered his first comprehensive report exactly 2 weeks later, and what he found was far worse than I had imagined. Victoria wasn't just cheating on me. She was running what amounted to a completely parallel life that I knew nothing about. Ryan M. turned out to be Ryan Martinez, a 29-year-old personal trainer at her gym, and they had been seeing each other for 9 months. 9 months of lies, 9 months of secret meetings, 9 months of my wife living a double life. But the revelation about Ryan was just the beginning. There was also Brandon, a recently divorced father she had met through her book club, and someone named Kyle who worked at the car dealership where she had been getting her vehicle serviced with suspicious frequency. 3 different men. 3 separate relationships running simultaneously. I sat in my car in that Starbucks parking lot, staring at the evidence, trying to process the fact that my wife of 18 years had been juggling 3 different affairs. The photographs Thomas had taken were exactly what you would expect, and seeing them felt like getting punched in the stomach repeatedly. There was Victoria holding hands with Ryan outside some trendy restaurant I had never heard of. Victoria and Brandon getting cozy and intimate at a wine bar downtown, looking like any other couple on a date night. Victoria and Kyle embracing in the parking lot of a hotel that was definitely not in our neighborhood, and definitely not somewhere she had any legitimate reason to be. But the real gut punch, the thing that made me realize just how calculated and cruel this whole situation was, came in Thomas's second report. Through his surveillance work and public record searches, he had discovered that Victoria had been texting extensively with her sister Linda about her long-term plans. She wasn't just having affairs. She was planning to leave me entirely. Not only that, but she had decided that the perfect time to make her grand announcement would be at Rebecca's wedding reception. She wants to maximize the impact, Thomas explained to me, showing me screenshots he had obtained through a contact who worked with phone carriers. According to these text message exchanges, she believes that making a public announcement will prevent you from trying to manipulate her into staying with what she refers to as your guilt trips and emotional manipulation. I stared at those message screenshots for a long time, reading them over and over again, trying to understand how the woman I had been married to for 18 years could be so cold and calculating. 18 years of marriage, 18 years of building a life together, and my wife was planning to blow up our entire family at our daughter's most important day because she thought it would make for good theater. She wanted to hurt me as much as possible, and she had decided that humiliating me in front of our family and friends at Rebecca's wedding would be the perfect way to do it. That's when I made my decision about how I was going to handle this situation. I realized that I could have confronted Victoria immediately after learning about her plan. I could have staged my own dramatic intervention, maybe even shown up at one of her little romantic rendezvous with all the evidence in hand, catching her red-handed with one of her boyfriends. But that approach would have been about satisfying my own ego and getting immediate emotional gratification. It wouldn't have been about protecting Rebecca's wedding day, which had become my primary concern. Victoria was clearly counting on me being too shocked, hurt, and unprepared to respond effectively when she made her public announcement. She was banking on the element of surprise, expecting me to crumble under the pressure of being humiliated in front of our family and friends. She had severely underestimated me, and that miscalculation was going to cost her dearly. I spent the next 7 weeks methodically preparing for what was coming. First, I quietly retained the best divorce attorney in town, a woman named Catherine Hoffman, who had built a reputation for being both thorough and ruthless in her approach to family law. She filed the initial divorce papers immediately, but agreed to hold off on serving them until after Rebecca's wedding was over. This gave me the legal protection I needed while maintaining the element of surprise that Victoria thought belonged to her. Then I started the tedious but crucial work of documenting everything related to our marriage and finances. I gathered bank statements, credit card bills, property records, and all the other boring paperwork that becomes absolutely vital when you're dividing marital assets. What I discovered during this process made Victoria's betrayal even more infuriating. She had been spending our money on her boyfriends for months. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, and even a romantic weekend trip to Napa with Ryan that she had told me was a mandatory work retreat. I also made copies of everything Thomas had gathered during his investigation. The photographs, phone records, financial evidence, surveillance reports. Everything that painted a crystal clear picture of Victoria's activities and deception. Catherine suggested that I prepare what she called a comprehensive disclosure package, just in case Victoria tried to claim later that I was being vindictive or making false accusations against her. But the hardest part of those 7 weeks wasn't the legal preparation or the paperwork. The hardest part was acting completely normal while living with this woman every single day. I had to wake up next to Victoria every morning, make small talk over coffee, and pretend that I didn't know she was planning to humiliate me at our daughter's wedding. I had to help her with wedding planning details, discussing flowers and seating arrangements, all while knowing that she was planning to use Rebecca's special day as the stage for her grand exit performance. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me during those weeks. Victoria was putting tremendous effort into making Rebecca's wedding day absolutely perfect, fussing over every detail and wanting everything to be exactly right. At the same time, she was planning to completely destroy that perfect day by making it all about her own dramatic announcement. She was working hard to create something beautiful just so she could tear it down for maximum impact. The week before the wedding, Victoria started getting visibly nervous, but not about her planned announcement. She was nervous about the wedding itself, suddenly obsessing over details that had been settled and finalized months earlier. She kept reorganizing the seating chart, second-guessing the flower arrangements, and worrying about things that were completely under control. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she was having second thoughts about her grand gesture, maybe realizing how cruel and selfish her plan really was. But Thomas's continued surveillance showed me that I was wrong to hope for any last-minute change of heart. Victoria met with Ryan twice during that final week, clearly going over their plan and making sure everything was in place for her big moment. She wasn't having second thoughts about destroying our family. She was just making sure that everything would be perfect for her dramatic performance. Rebecca's wedding day dawned absolutely clear and beautiful, with perfect weather that seemed to promise a wonderful celebration ahead. The ceremony was being held at Holy Trinity Church, which held special significance for our family since it was the same church where Victoria and I had exchanged vows 2 decades earlier. Watching Rebecca walk down that aisle in the stunning vintage dress we had discovered together at a charming antique shop, something she had fallen in love with during our mother-daughter shopping trips, was one of the most emotional moments of my life. Seeing the pure joy radiating from Rebecca's face as she married Chris was everything a father could want for his daughter. The ceremony was absolutely perfect, filled with love and happiness and hope for the future. Victoria played her part beautifully during the entire ceremony, crying at all the right moments and appearing to be the picture of a devoted mother and wife. She even held my hand during the exchange of vows and whispered to me, "Remember when that was us?" during the ring ceremony. If I hadn't known what was coming later that evening, I might have been completely fooled by her performance. The reception was being held at the Ocean View Club, a gorgeous venue that offered breathtaking views overlooking the water. Victoria had chosen this location specifically because it struck the perfect balance of being elegant and sophisticated without feeling stuffy or pretentious. She was absolutely right about the choice. It was perfect for Rebecca's personality and style. The cocktail hour went smoothly without any issues. Dinner was delicious and well received by all the guests, and Rebecca's maid of honor delivered a speech that had everyone in the room alternating between laughter and tears. Throughout the entire evening, I kept a careful eye on Victoria, watching for any signs or signals that would indicate her planned announcement was approaching. She seemed more animated and energetic than usual, checking her phone with unusual frequency and glancing around the reception room like she was looking for someone specific. During the traditional father-daughter dance, she positioned herself at the edge of the dance floor with a strange, almost secretive smile on her face, like she was savoring some private joke that only she understood. After our dance ended and while the DJ was setting up his equipment for the party portion of the evening, Victoria excused herself to go to the ladies' room. She was gone for almost 20 minutes, which seemed unusually long, even for wedding reception bathroom breaks. When she finally returned, there was something noticeably different about her demeanor. She looked more confident and resolved, like someone who had just made a final decision about something important. She had clearly reapplied her lipstick and fixed her hair, almost like she was preparing herself for some kind of important performance or presentation. That's when I spotted Ryan Martinez for the first time that evening. He was sitting at table 9 with the Kellys, who were our neighbors from just 2 streets over. Apparently, their daughter Megan had brought him as her date to the wedding, having met him at the same gym where he worked and assuming that he was single and available. The Kellys had absolutely no idea about his connection to our family or his ongoing relationship with my wife. He appeared younger than I had expected from the surveillance photos, with that kind of artificial confidence that seems to come from spending excessive amounts of time in front of gym mirrors, admiring your own reflection. When Victoria returned from the bathroom, Ryan caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small, subtle nod. It was clearly a prearranged signal, confirmation that everything was in place for whatever they had planned together. The moment of truth was approaching, and I could feel the tension building as Victoria prepared to execute her carefully orchestrated plan. The DJ finished setting up all his equipment and invited everyone to join the bride and groom on the dance floor for the evening's festivities. Rebecca and Chris started things off with a slow, romantic song, swaying together in the center of the floor as newlyweds often do. Gradually, other couples began joining them, creating a beautiful scene of family and friends, celebrating love and commitment. Victoria suddenly grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor, which immediately struck me as odd behavior, since she usually needed significant convincing to dance in public settings. We swayed together to the music for a few minutes, but I could feel her tension building with each passing moment. She kept glancing over at Ryan's table where he sat with the unsuspecting Kellys, and her grip on my hand was getting progressively tighter and more desperate. Finally, she stepped back from me and said with obvious determination, "I need to tell you something." The rehearsed quality in her voice was unmistakable. She had clearly practiced this moment many times. "Here?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what was coming and had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Yes, here, she said firmly, her voice carrying that artificial confidence of someone who believes they're about to deliver a devastating blow. I can't pretend anymore. That's when Victoria walked purposefully over to the DJ booth and asked for the microphone. The music stopped abruptly, creating a sudden silence that drew everyone's attention to the front of the room. All the guests turned to look at us, naturally expecting perhaps a heartfelt speech thanking everyone for attending, or maybe a toast to the happy couple. Instead, Victoria took a deep breath and announced clearly into the microphone, "I have an announcement to make." The entire room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Rebecca looked confused and concerned, clearly wondering what her mother was about to say. Chris looked equally worried, sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what was happening. I could see Ryan sitting back in his chair across the room with that smug smirk that Thomas had described in his surveillance reports, clearly enjoying the show he was about to witness. "I've been living a lie for far too long," Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system to every corner of the reception hall. "And I can't continue doing it anymore." She paused dramatically, building up to what she clearly believed would be her moment of triumph. "I've decided to start a new life without you, Daniel." She turned to look directly at me, and I could see in her eyes that she was expecting me to completely crumble under the pressure. She was waiting for me to break down emotionally, or get angry and start yelling, or maybe even beg her to reconsider her decision. The entire room was staring at me, waiting to see how I would react to being publicly humiliated and abandoned at my own daughter's wedding reception. Instead of any of those reactions, I simply smiled calmly and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Perfect timing. I have something for you too." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had been carrying with me all day. It was sealed with my attorney's official law firm stamp and contained everything I had been preparing for the past 7 weeks. I held it out to Victoria with completely steady hands, maintaining eye contact as I offered it to her. "What is this?" she asked, but I could already hear that some of her confidence was beginning to waver. "Open it," I said simply, keeping my voice calm and controlled. Victoria took the envelope with hands that were starting to shake slightly. The room remained so quiet that you could hear the paper tearing as she opened it and began pulling out the contents. First came the official divorce papers, then the surveillance photographs that Thomas had taken, followed by the bank statements showing her unauthorized spending on her boyfriends. I watched Victoria's face transform completely as she realized what she was looking at in those documents. The color drained from her cheeks as if someone had opened a valve, and her hands started shaking so badly that she almost dropped the papers she was holding. The confident, triumphant expression she had worn just moments earlier was replaced by something that looked like pure panic. You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible even with the microphone still in her other hand. "For months," I said calmly, making sure my voice carried clearly to every person in that silent reception hall. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice that you were dating half the town?" That's when Victoria completely lost control and started screaming. But this wasn't the angry, righteous screaming of someone who felt wronged. This was panicked, desperate screaming of someone who had just realized their carefully laid plans had backfired spectacularly. She yelled at me for spying on her, for ruining everything she had worked toward, and for making her look like a fool in front of everyone. Her voice cracked with desperation as she tried to regain some control over the situation she had created. But here's the crucial thing about making a public scene. It only works if you have the audience on your side. And Victoria definitely did not have that support. You see, she had made one absolutely critical miscalculation in her planning. She had convinced herself that people would see her announcement as brave and empowering, like some kind of inspirational moment of a woman finally standing up for herself. Instead, what everyone actually saw was a woman who had deliberately chosen her daughter's wedding day to blow up her family for the sake of a 29-year-old personal trainer who was currently trying his best to disappear into his chair. Rebecca was crying, but not for the reason Victoria had expected or hoped for. She was crying because her mother had just attempted to destroy what should have been the happiest and most special day of her life. Chris was holding Rebecca protectively, looking at Victoria like she was something disgusting he had accidentally scraped off the bottom of his shoe. The rest of our guests were displaying various stages of shock and outright disgust at what they were witnessing. Our friends, people who had known Victoria for years and considered her a close part of their lives, were staring at her with expressions that ranged from deep disappointment to barely concealed anger. They couldn't believe that someone they had trusted and respected would do something so cruel and selfish. The Kellys, meanwhile, were having what appeared to be a heated, whispered conversation with Ryan, who looked like he desperately wanted to crawl under his table and disappear from the entire situation. But perhaps the worst part for Victoria was what happened to the surveillance photographs. In her panic and desperation, she had scattered them across the floor around her feet, and now everyone in the reception hall could see them clearly. Pictures of her with Ryan, intimate photos of her with Brandon, evidence of her relationship with Kyle. Months and months of lies and betrayal were literally laid out on the floor for everyone to see. There was no denying what they showed. No way to spin or explain away the visual evidence of her multiple affairs. "You planned this whole thing!" she accused me, her voice breaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "You deliberately set me up to make me look bad." "No," I said quietly, maintaining my calm demeanor while she fell apart in front of our family and friends. "You set yourself up with your own choices and actions. I just made sure I was prepared and ready when you decided to follow through with your plan." And then I did something that surprised even myself. I didn't storm out dramatically or slam any doors behind me. I didn't make any grand speeches or try to get the last word in. I simply walked calmly and quietly through the crowd of stunned guests, past the scattered photographs on the floor, and past the woman who had been my wife for 18 years. I walked out into the cool night air with my dignity intact. Behind me, I could hear Victoria still screaming at anyone who would listen, Rebecca crying over what her mother had just done to her special day, and the confused murmur of 100 wedding guests trying to process and understand what they had just witnessed. But I didn't look back even once. I got into my car and drove directly to the hotel where I had thoughtfully booked a room for the night. This wasn't because I couldn't go home to my own house. It was because I wanted to be completely alone, to process everything that had just happened, and to decompress from the emotional intensity of the evening. 18 years of marriage had just ended in approximately 5 minutes at my daughter's wedding reception. The finality of it was both devastating and oddly liberating at the same time. My phone started ringing almost immediately after I reached my hotel room. Rebecca called first, sobbing and apologizing profusely for her mother's behavior, as if she somehow bore responsibility for Victoria's choices. I spent several minutes reassuring her that none of this was her fault and that she had nothing to apologize for. Then Chris called to check on me and make sure I was emotionally okay after everything that had happened. After that, my brother called, followed by my sister and then several of our longtime friends. All of them were calling to express their shock at Victoria's behavior and to offer their support during what they knew must be an incredibly difficult time for me. But the call that genuinely surprised me came around midnight, when I was finally starting to wind down and process the day's events. It was Linda, Victoria's younger sister, and her voice sounded strained and guilty when I answered the phone. "Daniel," she said when I picked up, "I need to tell you something important, and I should have told you much sooner than this. If it's about Victoria's plan to announce the divorce at the wedding, I already knew about that," I said, assuming she was calling to give me information I had already discovered through my investigation. "No, this isn't about that," Linda said quietly, and I could hear the shame and regret in her voice. "This is about the money, Daniel. About what Victoria has been doing with your money." That statement immediately got my full attention. I sat up straighter in my hotel room chair, suddenly alert and focused on what Linda was about to tell me. It turns out that Victoria hadn't just been spending our joint money on lavish dinners and hotel rooms for her boyfriends, which was bad enough. She had been systematically and deliberately draining our savings accounts for months, transferring substantial amounts of money to a separate account that she had opened without telling me anything about it. Linda knew about this financial deception because Victoria had actually asked her sister to help set up the secret account, claiming that she needed emergency funds available in case I ever became financially controlling or tried to restrict her access to money. The amount of money that Victoria had stolen was absolutely staggering when Linda finally gave me the full numbers. Nearly $45,000 had been taken from our joint savings account, money that we had been accumulating together for years for major expenses and emergencies. Additionally, another $18,000 had been drained from our emergency fund, which we had been carefully building for unexpected situations and financial security. This was money that Victoria had been planning to take with her when she started her new life, leaving me with essentially nothing after 18 years of marriage. "She was going to leave you with almost nothing, Daniel," Linda said, her voice thick with shame and regret. "I tried to talk her out of it multiple times, but she kept saying that you deserved to lose everything for holding her back all these years and preventing her from living her best life." I thanked Linda sincerely for having the courage to tell me the truth, knowing how difficult it must have been to essentially betray her own sister's confidence. As soon as I hung up with her, I immediately called Catherine Hoffman, my divorce attorney. Even though it was well past midnight, she answered on the second ring, a testament to her professionalism and dedication to her clients. "I take it the evening went exactly as we expected it would," Catherine said, clearly having anticipated that I might need to call her after the wedding reception. "Actually, it went better than expected," I said. And then I told her everything Linda had just revealed about the stolen money and the secret account. "Perfect," Catherine said, and I could hear her making notes even at that late hour. "Financial fraud, multiple cases of adultery, and abandonment of the marriage. She's just made this divorce proceeding very easy for us to handle." The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room to discover 19 missed calls and 47 text messages on my phone. Most of these communications were from friends and family members, expressing their continued support and checking on my well-being after the previous night's dramatic events. But several of the messages were from Victoria herself, and reading through them provided a fascinating glimpse into her mental state as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The text messages from Victoria started out apologetic and remorseful, but gradually became more frantic and angry as the night progressed, and I failed to respond to any of them. The progression was almost like watching someone go through the stages of grief in real time through text messages. "Daniel, we need to talk about what happened tonight," was her first message, sent around 11 p.m. "I know you're upset, but you don't understand the whole situation and why I felt I had to do what I did," came about an hour later. "You can't just ignore me forever. We have 18 years of history together," she sent around 1 a.m. "This is completely ridiculous. Just answer your phone so we can discuss this like adults," was her 3 a.m. message, showing her growing frustration. But the final message, sent at nearly 5 a.m., was the one that made me actually laugh out loud. "Fine, be childish about this whole thing, but you can't divorce me without my consent. I have rights too." That last message demonstrated just how little Victoria understood about how divorce proceedings actually work in the real world. Apparently, she had spent so much time and energy planning her dramatic public exit that she had forgotten to research the basic legal realities of ending a marriage. Her belief that she could somehow prevent or block the divorce showed how completely out of touch she was with the situation she had created for herself. I didn't respond to any of her messages, no matter how desperate or angry they became. Instead, I got dressed and drove directly to Rebecca's house to check on her and Chris, knowing that they were probably still processing and dealing with the emotional fallout from the previous evening's events. When I arrived at their house, I found that they were both still working through what had happened, but Rebecca was showing more strength and resilience than I had expected from her. We sat together on their back porch with coffee, and she opened up about what she had been thinking and feeling since the wedding reception disaster. "I should have seen this coming," Rebecca said, shaking her head with regret. "Mom has been acting really weird for months leading up to the wedding. All those mysterious late nights when she claimed to be working, the expensive new clothes that seemed totally inappropriate for her age and profession, the way she kept obsessively checking her phone during all our wedding planning sessions. I just assumed she was stressed about the wedding preparations and trying to make everything perfect for my big day. None of this is your fault in any way," I told her firmly, wanting to make sure she understood that she bore no responsibility for her mother's choices. "Your mother made her own decisions about how to handle her life, and she chose to make them publicly at your wedding reception. That's entirely on her, not on you or anyone else." "Are you okay, though?" Rebecca asked me with genuine concern in her voice. "I mean, really okay? You seemed so calm and prepared last night, but this has to be devastating for you emotionally." I thought carefully about her question for a moment, considering how I actually felt about everything that had happened. Was I okay? I had just ended an 18-year marriage in the most public and dramatic way possible. My wife had been cheating on me with 3 different men simultaneously, and had been systematically stealing our money to fund her affairs. She had tried to humiliate me at our daughter's wedding, and I had responded by humiliating her instead. But reflecting on all of that, I realized something surprising. "I'm free," I told Rebecca honestly. "For the first time in months, I feel completely free from all the lies and deception and wondering what was really going on. The uncertainty and suspicion are over, and I can finally start moving forward with my life." The divorce proceedings moved remarkably quickly after that dramatic night at the wedding reception. Victoria initially tried to fight the divorce, attempting to mount a legal defense based on claims that I had been emotionally abusive throughout our marriage. She alleged that her multiple affairs were actually a natural response to my supposedly controlling behavior and emotional neglect over the years. Her strategy seemed to be painting herself as the victim of a bad marriage who had been driven to seek affection and validation elsewhere. However, it's incredibly difficult to make a convincing case for emotional abuse when there are clear, undeniable photographs of you cheating with 3 different men simultaneously. The visual evidence that Thomas had gathered completely undermined any sympathy Victoria might have generated with her victim narrative. Additionally, the bank records showing that she had systematically stolen tens of thousands of dollars from our marital assets made it impossible for her to claim any moral high ground in the proceedings. Catherine Hoffman proved to be every bit as good as her reputation had suggested she would be. She was thorough, strategic, and absolutely relentless in her approach to the case. Catherine skillfully negotiated a settlement that left Victoria with minimal alimony payments, while ensuring that I retained ownership of our house and recovered most of our shared assets. Most importantly, the settlement included full reimbursement for all the money that Victoria had stolen from our accounts to fund her affairs. Victoria's attorney was a court-appointed lawyer since she could no longer afford Catherine's premium fees after depleting our savings accounts. This legal representation was adequate, but clearly outmatched by Catherine's experience and expertise. Recognizing the weakness of Victoria's position and the strength of the evidence against her, Victoria's attorney strongly advised her to accept the settlement offer rather than risk an even worse outcome if the case went to trial. Ryan Martinez disappeared from Victoria's life approximately 3 weeks after the wedding reception. Apparently, he hadn't signed up for the intense drama and public scrutiny that came with dating a woman who was going through a highly contentious and very public divorce. The fantasy of a romantic relationship was much more appealing when it was conducted in secret hotel rooms and private dinners. The reality of being associated with someone who had become the subject of local gossip and social media discussion was far less attractive to him. Brandon and Kyle also made themselves increasingly scarce as the weeks went by. Once they realized that they had been part of Victoria's rotation of boyfriends rather than her exclusive romantic focus, the appeal of the relationship diminished significantly for them as well. The discovery that they were just 3 parts of Victoria's complicated web of deception was apparently not the kind of arrangement any of them had thought they were getting into. Victoria initially moved in with her sister Linda on a temporary basis, but that arrangement became strained fairly quickly. Linda was dealing with her own guilt about having helped Victoria set up the secret bank account, and having Victoria living in her house was a constant reminder of the family drama she had become entangled in. Eventually, Victoria found a small apartment across town that she could afford on her reduced income and minimal alimony payments. Victoria made several attempts to reconcile with Rebecca during this period, but Rebecca wasn't emotionally ready to forgive her mother for what she had done. The betrayal went far deeper than just the affairs or even the financial theft. It was about Victoria's decision to destroy Rebecca's wedding day for the sake of her own dramatic gesture. She made her choice, Rebecca told me during one of our weekly dinners that we had established to maintain our close relationship. She chose to hurt all of us just to make herself feel better about her situation. She chose to do it at my wedding, on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Those aren't the kind of choices you just apologize for and expect everyone to move on from immediately. The entire divorce process was completely finalized 7 months after that wedding reception confrontation. When everything was settled, I kept our house and most of our shared assets, while Victoria kept her car and whatever remained of her dignity after the public humiliation. Most importantly for both of us, we each gained our freedom to start completely new chapters in our lives. Looking back now, 2 years after that dramatic wedding reception confrontation, I've come to realize that Victoria's plan actually worked out perfectly for everyone involved, just not in the way she had originally intended it to work. She had wanted to start a completely new life without me as her husband, and she got exactly what she was looking for. The irony is that in her attempts to hurt and humiliate me, she ended up giving me the gift of freedom and a fresh start that I didn't even know I needed. Victoria is apparently dating someone new now, according to the occasional updates I hear through mutual acquaintances. She met this new boyfriend through an online dating platform, and from what I understand, he doesn't know anything about her history of maintaining multiple relationships simultaneously, or her tendency toward dramatic public gestures. I genuinely hope that she has learned something from the consequences of her previous behavior, and that she treats this new relationship with more honesty and respect than she showed our marriage. As for me, I'm doing significantly better than I ever expected I would be after such a devastating betrayal. I started cautiously dating again about a year after the divorce was finalized, and I'm currently seeing someone truly wonderful. Her name is Nicole, And she's also divorced, which means she understands the importance of complete honesty and open communication in a relationship. We've made a mutual commitment to taking things slowly and talking about everything openly, which feels refreshing after years of living with secrets and deception. Rebecca and Chris are thriving in their married life together. They've purchased their first house, adopted an adorable dog that has become the center of their world, and are actively discussing the possibility of starting a family in the near future. Rebecca and I have maintained our tradition of having dinner together every week, which has become one of the highlights of my schedule. She has gradually been rebuilding her relationship with Victoria, though it's been a slow and careful process. I make it a point not to interfere with or influence that relationship. Rebecca is an adult who can make her own informed decisions about how much contact she wants to have with her mother. But here's something that continues to amaze me even now. People still remember and talk about Victoria's dramatic announcement that night, but they remember my calm, measured response even more vividly. I've had literally dozens of people approach me over the past 2 years to tell me how impressed they were with the way I handled such an impossible and humiliating situation. What strikes them isn't that I managed to embarrass Victoria in return, but that I maintained my dignity and composure throughout the entire ordeal. "You turned her moment into your moment," my brother told me a few weeks after the wedding, "and you did it without losing your dignity or hurting anyone who didn't deserve what they got." That observation really captures something important about the nature of revenge and how to handle betrayal. The most effective kind of revenge isn't about hurting someone back or getting even in some petty way. True revenge is about protecting yourself and the people you love while allowing the natural consequences of someone else's poor choices to speak for themselves. Victoria had wanted to humiliate me publicly at Rebecca's wedding reception, but instead, she ended up humiliating herself, losing her family, and inadvertently handing me everything I needed to move forward successfully with my life. She had spent weeks planning what she thought would be the perfect revenge story against me. The problem was that she had cast herself as the wrong character in that story. Instead of being the triumphant hero finally breaking free from an oppressive situation, she became the villain who destroyed her daughter's special day for the sake of personal drama. Meanwhile, I became the sympathetic character who handled an impossible situation with grace and dignity. The interesting thing is that I still get asked about that dramatic night all the time, even 2 years later. Just last month, I had an unexpected encounter while doing routine grocery shopping. I ran into the Kellys at the local supermarket. You might remember them as Ryan's unwitting accomplices from Table 9 at the wedding reception. Mrs. Kelly practically cornered me in the cereal aisle, looking around nervously like she was about to share classified government secrets with me. "Daniel," she said in a conspiratorial whisper, "I have to ask you something that's been bothering me ever since that night. How on earth did you manage to stay so calm and collected when Victoria pulled what she pulled? If my husband had done something like that to me in front of everyone we know, I honestly think I would have thrown something at him or completely lost my mind." I gave Mrs. Kelly the completely honest answer to her question. The truth was that I had spent months preparing myself both emotionally and practically for exactly what happened that evening. By the time Victoria stepped up to that microphone to make her dramatic announcement, I had already done all of my grieving for our marriage. I had already come to terms with the fact that the woman I had married 18 years earlier was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust. But there's another reason I was able to stay so calm that night. Something I haven't shared with very many people because it feels almost too personal and meaningful to discuss casually. About an hour before the reception began, I was in the men's restroom at the venue, trying to mentally prepare myself for what I knew was coming later that evening. An older gentleman, who had to be in his 70s, was washing his hands at the sink next to me. He struck up a friendly conversation, as people often do at weddings. "Beautiful wedding ceremony," he commented pleasantly while drying his hands. "Thank you," I replied politely. "She's my daughter, so I'm probably a bit biased." "Ah," he nodded with understanding. "That explains it. Best day of her life. Probably the worst day for your wallet, though, I bet." He chuckled good-naturedly at his own joke, then looked at me more seriously and perceptively. "You look like a man who's carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders right now. Is it just wedding stress, or is there something more serious going on?" I almost brushed him off with a polite but dismissive response like, "Yeah, just tired from all the wedding preparations." But something about his kind, understanding eyes made me want to be honest with him, even though he was a complete stranger. "Something like that," I said carefully. "I'm just preparing myself mentally for some very difficult news that's going to come out tonight." He studied my face thoughtfully for a long moment, then said something that I will absolutely never forget for the rest of my life. "Son, I've been married for 53 years. I've buried 2 wives during that time and learned one thing for absolute certain. Grace under pressure isn't really about being strong or tough. It's about being prepared to let go of what's already gone." I never saw that wise old gentleman again after that night, and I still have no idea who he was or how he ended up at Rebecca's wedding. But his profound words kept echoing in my head throughout Victoria's entire announcement and the confrontation that followed. What's already gone? She was already gone from our marriage, had been gone for months before that night. I was just finally allowing everyone else to see the reality that I had already accepted. The other thing that people don't fully realize or appreciate is just how much detailed detective work actually goes into orchestrating something like what I did that night. Thomas Wright, my private investigator, didn't just take a few photographs and write up some basic reports about Victoria's activities. He created comprehensive timelines, meticulously cross-referenced our credit card statements with Victoria's alleged whereabouts and claimed activities, and even tracked her gym visits to determine how often she was actually working out versus meeting up with Ryan for their secret rendezvous. "Your wife is surprisingly methodical and organized for someone who's conducting 3 separate affairs simultaneously," Thomas told me during one of our regular update meetings. "Most people in her situation get careless and sloppy pretty quickly, start making obvious mistakes that give them away. But Victoria has kept detailed calendars, maintained different phones for communicating with different guys, and even created elaborate fake work events and business trips to explain her absences from home." He paused and looked at me with a mixture of professional admiration and personal sympathy. "If she had put even half this much effort and creativity into saving her marriage with you, you probably wouldn't be sitting here hiring me right now." That observation stung because it was absolutely true, but it also helped me understand just how deliberate and calculated Victoria's deception had been. She hadn't just fallen into these affairs accidentally or impulsively. She had treated them like a part-time job, complete with scheduling, logistics, and careful planning. Meanwhile, she had been treating our 18-year marriage like an afterthought that didn't deserve her attention or effort. The aftermath of that wedding night was actually much messier and more complicated than I've made it sound in telling this story. Victoria didn't just disappear quietly into her new life like some people might expect. Instead, she spent several weeks actively calling our mutual friends and acquaintances, trying desperately to spin the story in her favor and control the narrative about what had really happened between us. She told people that I had been emotionally distant and cold toward her for years, creating an atmosphere where she felt unloved and unappreciated. She claimed that she had tried repeatedly to save our marriage, but that I was emotionally unavailable and unwilling to work on our relationship. She even went so far as to claim that the money she had taken from our accounts was actually fair compensation for years of what she called unpaid emotional labor that she had provided to our family. Some people initially bought into her version of events, at least partially. There's a natural human tendency to assume that there are always 2 sides to every story, and Victoria could be very convincing and persuasive when she wanted to be. She had always been skilled at presenting herself as the victim in difficult situations, and she deployed those skills aggressively in the weeks following the wedding reception disaster. But the photographs that Thomas had taken were extremely difficult for Victoria to argue with or explain away. Visual evidence of someone holding hands romantically with their personal trainer, getting cozy at wine bars with book club members, and embracing in hotel parking lots doesn't leave much room for alternative interpretations. The financial records showing systematic theft of marital assets were even harder for her to justify or spin in her favor. You simply cannot make a convincing case that emotional neglect drove you to steal $18,000 from your family's emergency fund. That kind of deliberate financial betrayal goes far beyond anything that could be explained as a response to marital problems or relationship dissatisfaction. The hardest part of this entire ordeal wasn't dealing with Victoria's attempts at reputation management or even processing my own feelings about the betrayal. The most difficult aspect was watching Rebecca navigate the emotional aftermath of what her mother had done. For months after the wedding, Rebecca blamed herself for not recognizing the warning signs earlier and for not somehow preventing the entire disaster from happening in the first place. She went to therapy to work through these feelings, which definitely helped her process the trauma and guilt she was experiencing. But she also started planning her future with Chris with a level of hypervigilance about relationship red flags that absolutely broke my heart as her father. The damage Victoria had done went far beyond just destroying our marriage. She had damaged our daughter's ability to trust completely in her own relationship. I keep analyzing and questioning everything Chris does, Rebecca confided in me about 7 months after the wedding reception incident. Like if he's even 5 minutes late coming home from work, part of me starts wondering if he's beginning to go down the same path that Mom went down. I know it's not fair to him at all, and I know logically that he's nothing like her, but I can't help myself from thinking these thoughts. That level of anxiety and suspicion is the real, lasting damage that Victoria caused. Not just the financial theft or the public humiliation, but the way she undermined Rebecca's fundamental ability to trust in love and commitment. Rebecca is working through these issues with professional help, and Chris has been incredibly patient and understanding throughout the process. But those emotional scars are going to last much longer than any of the financial or legal consequences of the divorce. However, there's something unexpectedly positive that came out of this entire terrible experience. I learned that I'm significantly stronger than I had ever thought I was, not just emotionally, but also practically and personally. I had been married for so long that I had completely forgotten how to be just myself, without constantly considering someone else's needs, opinions, and preferences in every single decision I made. Now I eat dinner whenever I'm actually hungry, not when someone else thinks it's the appropriate dinner time. I watch whatever I want to see on television without having to negotiate or compromise on programming choices. I bought a motorcycle, which was something Victoria had consistently vetoed for 15 years because she considered it too dangerous and irresponsible. I'm taking a photography class at the community college, learning to speak Spanish through an online program, and actively planning a trip to Ireland that I've been talking about doing since I was 30 years old, but never followed through on. Nicole, the wonderful woman I'm currently dating, likes to joke that she's dating what she calls the upgraded version of me. Victoria didn't know what she had, Nicole told me recently during one of our conversations about our respective past relationships. Her loss is definitely my gain, and I'm grateful every day that she was stupid enough to let you go. And honestly, I think Nicole is absolutely right about that assessment. Victoria wanted to start a completely new life without me as part of it, and in her attempts to achieve that goal, she inadvertently gave me the opportunity to start a new life without her. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply living your best life and being genuinely happy without the person who tried to destroy you. The interesting thing is that I continue to get asked about that dramatic night all the time, even now, 2 years after it happened. Just last month, I had another one of those unexpected encounters while doing my regular grocery shopping. I ran into the Kellys again at the supermarket. You remember them as Ryan's unwitting accomplices from Table 9 at the wedding reception. Mrs. Kelly practically cornered me once again, this time in the cereal aisle, looking around like she was about to share state secrets with a foreign agent. "Daniel," she said in that same conspiratorial whisper I remembered from our previous encounter, "I have to ask you something that's been bothering me ever since that night. How did you manage to stay so calm and collected when Victoria pulled what she pulled? If my husband had done something like that to me in front of everyone we know, I honestly think I would have thrown something at him." I gave her the same completely honest answer I had given before. The truth was that I had spent months preparing myself both emotionally and practically for exactly what happened that evening. By the time Victoria made her dramatic announcement, I had already done all of my grieving for the marriage. I had already accepted that the woman I had married 18 years earlier was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust anymore. People continue to remember Victoria's dramatic announcement, but they remember my measured response even more vividly and positively. I've had dozens of people approach me over the past 2 years to tell me how impressed they were with the way I handled such an impossible and humiliating situation. What strikes them isn't that I managed to embarrass Victoria in return, but that I maintained my dignity and composure under extreme pressure. "You turned her moment into your moment," my brother told me again a few weeks after the wedding. "And you did it without losing your dignity or hurting anyone who didn't deserve what they got." That observation really captures the essence of what happened that night and why people continue to talk about it. The most effective kind of revenge isn't about hurting someone back or getting even in some petty, vindictive way. True revenge is about protecting yourself and the people you love while allowing the natural consequences of someone else's poor choices to speak for themselves without any additional intervention from you. Victoria had wanted to humiliate me publicly at Rebecca's wedding reception, expecting me to crumble under the pressure and embarrassment. Instead, she ended up humiliating herself completely, losing her family and her reputation, and inadvertently handing me everything I needed to move forward successfully with my life. She had spent weeks meticulously planning what she thought would be the perfect revenge story against me for all the ways she felt I had disappointed her as a husband. The fundamental problem with her plan was that she had cast herself as the wrong character in that revenge story. Instead of being the triumphant hero, finally breaking free from an oppressive and unfulfilling situation, she became the villain who destroyed her daughter's special day for the sake of personal drama and selfish gratification. Meanwhile, I became the sympathetic character who handled an impossible situation with grace, dignity, and careful preparation. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply allowing someone to destroy themselves with their own poor choices, while you maintain your integrity and dignity throughout the process. Victoria wanted to hurt me, but she ended up giving me exactly what I needed to build a better life than I ever could have imagined while I was trapped in a marriage built on lies and deception.